So we now have a designed form with the dynamically generated drop-down menu, but when we click on send message, nothing really happens. However, when we refresh the page, we get this form resubmission, basically the confirmation if we want to resubmit, because when you're using post method for submitting the form, it basically posts it, and then when you want to refresh the page, it resubmits the same post. So in order to get rid of this, you have to reload the page by basically hitting the return in the URL field. So obviously at the moment it's not quite functional, this form, so let's go back to our editor and try and make it more functional than it currently is. If we go back to our functions.php, the next function we are going to be creating is called getPost. So function getPost. And what this function will do is it will collect the submitted data. And what we want to do is pass the one argument that we're going to be using here, which is going to be of the array type, so array type hinting, and it's going to be called expected. And by default, it's going to be an empty array. Basically, what this argument will tell this function is that if we pass any array of arguments, basically attributes, then only these should be returned from this function. Otherwise, you can return all of the submitted post variables. Okay, so we are going to start with output variables. So output, which is where we're going to be collecting all of the submitted data, and then we check if, and then exclamation mark, we check in if post actually exists, if the form has been submitted using the post method. And if it isn't, because obviously we're having this exclamation mark at the beginning, which checks for the opposite. So if it hasn't been submitted, if there's no post, then return output, obviously lowercase, return, and then output, not expected, output array, which is going to be basically an empty array. If it isn't, however, if there is a post submitted, then for each, we're going to use this post super global for each of these as key equals value. So we're looping through this submitted post request, and we are going to first we are going to purify the value. So value equals, and we're going to use this HTML entities we've discussed earlier. So HTML entities, we're passing through the first argument here will be the value, so value, but we want this value to be also trimmed. We don't want any white space on left or right hand side if anyone just puts space at the end or at the beginning. So trim, we're trimming this value. And then what we want to do is to put one flag, which is going to be ent_no quotes, which means we don't want to convert single double quotes to HTML entities, and then just the character set, which will be UTF-8. Now, what this is going to do, say you've got this form and someone submits some malicious script, like let's say, and I'm just going to basically scroll up a little bit, something like script tag, for instance, JavaScript tag with some malicious code in between the opening, obviously, and closing script, which could do some damage when you actually open this email in your email client. So what this HTML entities is going to do, rather than read it as a script, it's going to convert this, let's say, left angle tag, so angle brackets, right angle brackets, to its corresponding HTML entity, so which would be LT for left one and GT for right one, which means it's not going to be actually treated as a script as such. So this way we obviously avoid any malicious submissions through our form. So now that we have our value filtered, let's now check if, and then isn't with the exclamation mark, empty, expected. If we specify that we want only certain fields from this form to be submitted, then we're going to do something else. We're going to do something else. Okay, so if it's not empty, if there are specified expected fields, then if we check in array and we check for the key in the expected, then and only then we are going to add it to our output array. So output, we put the key, and then we associate it with a value. So we're checking basically just to discuss this a little bit further. So we have this expect. Let's say we're calling this get post function with the array of I only want name and email. So now imagine this expected contains this array, these two fields. So if it's not empty, and in this case it wouldn't be, then only get me these two fields. So if it's in this array, if the key through we currently are looping is inside of this array, and for name and email it would be the case, then add it to the output. Otherwise, they're just going to be ignored. So later on, when we actually return this output, it will only contain values associated with these two keys and nothing else. Okay, so this is for if expected array isn't empty. But if it is empty, then all we need to do is just add every single submitted field, basically. So it's, again, I just copied this. So it's just adding key and value to the output array. After we've obviously done the whole for each loop, at the end, we need to return the output. So if we now save it and go back to our contact page, let's go right to the top. And after the departments, when we're actually retrieving the array of departments, what we are going to do is start with the errors array, which is where we're going to be collecting all of the errors submitted when we submitted the form, and there are any errors. This is where they're going to be stored. And then what we're doing is create a post variable, and we associate the output of this get post function. And what we want to do is pass the array of items that we are only interested in. Say someone dynamically added another field and wanted to trick us in any way. It's just, again, it's just preventing any malicious submissions. We know that this form only has department, so only that is what we want to get. Department, then we have name as well. So let's add this to the array. And again, this indentation here. Then after name, we have, what else was there? There was email and telephone. Yeah, so email, there was telephone, and the last thing I think was comment. Yes, it is comment. So let's just double click it, select it, copy the name and comment. So these are the only ones that I'm interested in because our form only has these ones. So if someone just adds anything to it dynamically, maliciously, then it's not going to be processed anyway. Okay, so now what we're going to do, I'm just going to simply print this post, but only, and I'm going to check, if isn't empty post. So if this post variable, I mean, it's going to be an array effectively, isn't empty, then what I want to do is print it in a browser so we can see actually what we've submitted. And after this if isn't empty, we will have obviously our page and so on. So let's keep it like this for the time being. Let's quickly go back to the browser, refresh the page, and let's submit the message. And as you can see at the moment, the array contains department, which we didn't select anything from. Name is also empty, email is empty, telephone is empty, and comment is empty. But what's going to happen if I select one of the departments? And let's put some name, say Sebastian Soliński. And then let's put some email, ssdtutorials, gmail.com for instance, and telephone number 0800 800 800, whatever else, and some comment goes here. And let's submit now. There we go. Department 1, which is the first one which you've selected, which ID, the corresponding ID of this element is, of this record is 1. Then we have my name, which I've submitted as well, email, telephone, and a comment which I put in a comments field. So as you can see, everything has been submitted, and we now store this within this post variable. So let's now go back to the editor and remove this prints a. And in the next video, we are going to work with the data stored within this post array.